And thank you for having us here. It's an honor to be at Black Hat. Today, we're really excited to discuss with you the techniques that we're observing advanced persistent threats use when they perform job-themed social engineering. My name is Sveva Vittoria Scenarelli. I'm a principal threat intelligence analyst at PwC, where I track APTs based in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly in North Korea. And I'm joined today by a veritable expert on Iran-based threat actors, Allison Wikoff.
I think Sveva just called me a dinosaur. So I'm Allison Wikoff. I've been in the field about 20 years. My focus on the last half of my career has been on incident response and threat intelligence with a specific focus on Iran-based threats. And in my copious amounts of spare time, I also guest lecture at Columbia University. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Sveva to kick us off.
So just to set a little bit of context, I would like you to raise your hand if you've changed jobs in the past 12 months. How many of you? Okay, a few. Now, what we know is that a further 1 in 5 people is likely to change jobs over the next 12 months. And you might all be familiar with the concept of the Great Resignation, that phenomenon where in the wake of the pandemic, so many people have decided that they needed to change company or maybe change career entirely. And what we see as a cyber angle to the social context is that APTs are taking advantage of this and increasingly using job-themed lures. Particularly, North Korea-based and Iran-based threat actors stand out for their operational tempo and their brazenness in operating this kind of activity. So what we want to do today is take you through a few case studies of threat actors that are doing this and their tools, techniques, procedures, so that you can learn to recognize these attempts, and maybe your blue team or your red team might pick up a couple tips and tricks throughout this presentation. So we're going to start talking about a threat actor that PwC tracks internally as BlackArtemis. This is a threat actor that is known in open source as Hidden Cobra, which is how the US government refers to it, and Lazarus Group. I should caveat that Lazarus Group is a bit of a broad designation. There's a lot of activity that gets attributed to Lazarus. That's no surprise. This is a threat actor that has been active since at least 2007 and has changed a lot since then. But for the purposes of this presentation, I want to discuss with you a specific campaign by BlackArtemis, which is known as Operation Dream Job more broadly. This is an espionage-motivated campaign that is incredibly persistent in targeting the aerospace sector, the defense industrial base, manufacturing, chemical sector, for everything from military secrets to intellectual property to confidential information of strategic interest. So let's take a little bit of a look at how BlackArtemis approaches its initial access, like social engineering. I am very sad to report that email phishing is not dead. I wish it was dead. We all wish it was dead. It's not. So BlackArtemis does continue to send emails with malicious attachments to its targets. But over the past couple of years, we've observed BlackArtemis also pivot over to social engineering of social media, particularly LinkedIn, by building recruiter personas and directly approaching targets. So what we see right there on screen is an image that ESET actually shared in one of the reports in this campaign, where we see the threat actor trying to approach a victim. And if I may, in a very unprofessional manner for an alleged recruiter, being like, hey, how are you? What are you doing now? My parents aren't home. Do you want a new dream job? Which is kind of like, a bit strange. And the victim is like, oh, I'm working. I can't talk to right now. And the threat actor is like, no. Do you want to work for our company? Question mark, which is a bit aggressive. I'd be like, okay, maybe something's off, but no. What BlackArtemis also does is it will follow up with its targets via messaging apps, such as WhatsApp, to make sure that the victims do open the malicious lure documents or the malicious executables that the threat actor has sent. BlackArtemis will also set up domains. This can be for command and control of its malicious implants, to send emails that appear to come from a legit site, or indeed to perform web exploitation as an initial access method. So let's take a look at that. Now, BlackArtemis has set up a domain like this, which, if you look at it, kind of looks like Indeed, right? Very prominent job search and applications website. But if you look at the domain, it's not Indeed.com, which is the legitimate site, it's Indeedus.org. It's pretty good fake, would fool me at a first glance. And the threat actor would post here fake job descriptions for positions at Google or Oracle, so really high-profile companies. And when the victim navigated to these links that the threat actor sent, unbeknownst to them, their browser would get exploited with a 0-day at the time, which is a remote code execution vulnerability in Google Chrome. So they would be compromised and be delivered like a backdoor without knowing. Now, we live in an economy of information. We are constantly bombarded with everything digital. And so it's not practical to tell people, don't click links, don't open attachments. Like, seriously, we all have to do that. But there's a little piece of user awareness that leads to prevention here. Because just taking 1 second to check out whether that domain that you have been sent is the legitimate one could prevent compromise. So sometimes even just a double check matters. Let's take a look at an intrusion chain instead using lure documents, which is what we're all here for because we love them. So in the first instance, Artemis will build a fake job specification for some fabulous job at a high-profile company. And it will send it to the victim, which, at some point might enable macros. As this happens, the victim will be presented with a doc, RTF, docx document. But what happens in the meantime is that the macros are leading us to the next stage of the intrusion. They might, for example, in one case that we've observed, drop a base64 encoded payload in a folder that the victim is not likely to look into. In this case, it was C drivers. And then the threat actor will make sure that certutil.exe is dropped to that same folder and renamed. Certutil is then used to run and decode this base64 blob. And the renaming is interesting, by the way, because it means that a defender that is doing forensics won't necessarily know that certutil was used. This leaves us with a loader executable, which is then going to connect to a further remote server and pull out the actual payload, which is going to be a fully featured backdoor, pull down further file, execute commands, uploads files. And the threat actor is going to ensure that the loader also establishes persistence on the victim machine so that even after machine reboot, the threat actor has access. And this is done by, in most cases that we've observed by Artemis, through running rundll32.exe, pointing at the final stage payload, through a scheduled task. Let's take a moment. So let's say that your email filtering solution unfortunately got fooled this time by this kind of phishing email. Let's say that your user got compromised. But that's okay, because initial access is just that, initial access. There is a whole kill chain that the threat actor has to go through before you're fully compromised. And you can stop that. So an example of a detection opportunity here would be monitoring your environment for rundll32.exe running as a scheduled task and pointing at an unusual file path. That should not be normal in your environment. So you can monitor for that to have an idea that something malicious going on. Let's look at the lure documents. This is what they look like. So they have that little, enable content because this document is protected. Now, the aesthetic of these lure documents might change, but what helps us as defenders is the metadata. So in some of these cases, we saw that a lot of lure documents built by Artemis had this Mickey author metadata. Many of them had macros that would convert UUIDs into 32-bit or 64-bit shellcode payloads. Maybe they were doing specific Windows API aliasing, some variable definitions, custom message boxes. This is all the kind of things that we can find in macros that can help us as defenders hunt for more of that activity and even detect it when it's on our network. Actually, I should mention here that all indicators of compromise for activity related to this talk are going to be on our public GitHub, which is in the reference to this talk when the slides are published tomorrow. So you can all go look at those files and build your own detections. So far, we've talked about a North Korea-based threat actor that performs espionage-motivated operations. And now I want to talk as a different case study about another North Korea-based threat actor that instead is financially motivated. This is a threat actor that at PwC we track internally as BlackAlicanto, and who is very specifically focused on cryptocurrency. You're going to tell me, okay, fine, crypto is all the rage recently, but why is a North Korea-based threat actor interested in it? Well, I've got you. So, since at least 2017, North Korea-based threat actors have been known to consistently target cryptocurrency exchanges, compromise them to steal money. So much so that in 2021, the US DOJ indicted 3 North Korean nationals for their role in targeting Western banks and cryptocurrency companies for the purposes of revenue generation. Actually, just a couple of months ago, North Korea-based threat actors were attributed to the compromise of this Web 3.0 company, Axie Infinity, and they made off with $625 million US. Last week, I got tagged in a Twitter thread because I publish like a lot about BlackAlicanto, about this DeFi company that was said that they got compromised using the same TTPs that I was talking about BlackAlicanto like 2 weeks earlier, which are the same TTPs that we're gonna see now. So this is actively going on and it's targeting entities in the finance and cryptocurrency space. So watch out. BlackAlicanto is also in open source as Dangerous Password, CryptoCore, CryptoMimic, so quite a few names. And as we said, it's financially motivated. In terms of the social engineering that BlackAlicanto might conduct, email, again, but this threat actor likes to send compressed archives with link files or other type of documents, maybe a password-protected Word document and then a link file. This is also in keeping with a shift that we're seeing in the broader threat landscape, where with Microsoft disabling internet macros, threat actors are having to pivot a bit in their initial access techniques and using more and more link files, ISO files, MSI installers, and stuff like that. BlackAlicanto also abuses email forwarding. So it might forward its targets an email while impersonating an acquaintance of theirs. So that the victim goes like, oh, look, this person that I know shared me, forwarded me this analysis of stable coins. That's really interesting. Let me have a look. But actually, they're getting compromised. And BlackAlicanto also does social media approaches, pretending to be a recruiter. Maybe it entices the victim into asking more about their company. And BlackAlicanto does also domain spoofing. We see here gsaxhr.com, which is a Goldman Sachs spoof, or daiwainf.com. Daiwa Investment is a Japanese venture capital company. There is a hunting opportunity that I think is really fun and I've really enjoyed using to find more BlackAlicanto infrastructure, which is this threat actor loves to register domains through pork bun registrar. And if you look at the underlying servers that these domains resolve to, they all have very specific combinations of Apache, PHP, and OpenSSL versions in the server headers. So you can go and build that query and find more infrastructure. All of that information is going to be in the IOCs on our GitHub. So again, you can go and hunt for more. In terms of an intrusion chain, we've said that this threat actor will send an email, and then maybe there is like a .pdf.link or a .doc.link. So, you know, the victim thinks this is fine. This is just a normal document. When they click on it, they might just be presented with a decoy document. So they're like, oh, this analysis of the crypto market is so fascinating. But in the background, the LNK file is actually calling mshta.exe, which is connecting to a remote server to pull down a malicious JavaScript script that we call cabbage loader. What cabbage loader does in the first instance is to place a link file in the victim startup folder to ensure persistence, and then pulls down a whole series of other JavaScript payloads. These are called, a whole series of them, cabbage rat, and they've been described in great detail by Entity Security in a conference talk at Virus Bulletin 2020. They wrote a whole report about it, so please do check it out if you're interested in this. These are essentially profilers that want to make sure that the actual person that's interacting with them is not a sandbox, is not a researcher, but it's actually a target of interest. And at this point, the threat actor manually deploys a further JavaScript payload, cabbage.c, which is a fully featured backdoor, upload, download files, execute commands, all that jazz. And from there, the threat actor can then move laterally across the network. Other detection opportunity. Are you monitoring your environment for like link files that call mshta.exe and then, pull down and execute a file from a remote source? If that's common in your environment, that's kind of weird. If it's not, make sure that you're looking for this. This is not only specific to this threat actor. A lot of threat actors use these TTPs, so it's a good thing to keep an eye out for. If you'll pass me the pun, it's a bit like something fishy is going on, so you don't want that. This is what a BlackAlicanto job theme learn document might look like. So this is an interesting one because you can see that the threat actor is saying this is a position for blockchain intelligence group. But then it says, welcome, when you work for Commerce Real AG, and then the picture is chased back. So I'm like, if you want to spoof a company, at least decide which one. You don't need to give me 3 all at once. And talking about the metadata that we can use to detect this kind of activity and these are documents, well, actually, link files have this really interesting field which is called the machine ID. So unless the threat actor has scrubbed it out, you can use the machine ID metadata to cluster all the documents that this threat actor is building, pivot to hunt for more, or detect them on your network. And all those heuristics we talked about, so like the double extension files, a link file invoking a command or calling MSHTA, all of that is really interesting. We have a YAR rule on our GitHub to detect stuff like this. I wanted to highlight these documents as well because just a few months before BlackAlicanto was using this, we had seen Artemis, threat actor we mentioned before, using a very similar one. So you can see that both of them have the same structure. They say, welcome, when you work for blah, blah, by engineering the future well-being of humanity, you'll do X, Y, Z. This text is taken word for word from the Lockheed Martin careers website. What do you know? Artemis was spoofing Lockheed Martin, but then BlackAlicanto has taken all of that and put it for blockchain intelligence group or whatever. So, you know, in all these resignation, has a North Korea-based operator moved teams? It's a really interesting question. It's one that I'm working on in terms of like attribution and in clarifying the relationship between BlackAlicanto and Artemis. If you track these threat actors and you want to have a conversation about it, I'm all ears. You can catch us later and we can have a chat. And otherwise, I'll get back to you. Finally, I could not mention something that came up a few months ago. So the US Department of the Treasury released an advisory saying that North Korean IT workers are seeking jobs abroad, often under fake identities, maybe through proxy companies or proxy identities in third countries. And this is in order to, make money. They might work as application, web developers, digital coin developers. And there's a human rights angle here, which is that these IT workers often are in a forced labor situation. And what the advisor also said is that their wages get taken away to finance the North Korean regime. Not only, if these North Korean IT workers get access to a company of interest, they might actually hand off that access to North Korea-based APTs that then might exfiltrate, your crown jewels or your information of interest. So on one hand, we know that the UN Security Council has said that all of the funds that North Korea workers and North Korea-based APT generate go to fund the North Korean nuclear weapons program. And on the other, think about it. If you're a company and you run the risk of hiring a North Korean IT worker, on one hand, you risk breaching international sanctions. And on the other, you risk a North Korea-based APT then being in your network. You don't want that. So I guess one of my key takeaways here is the job market right now is a really key area for North Korea-based threat actors. So keep your eyes peeled, make sure you're aware of who you're interviewing. And for the love of all that is holy, don't open those links that you get sent on LinkedIn. Do not open them. On that note, I'm going to hand off to Allison. Thanks,
Sveva. All right, so let's move forward and talk a little bit about some of the recruiting that we're seeing in the Middle East. And by recruiting, I mean recruiting. Before we get into that, let's talk a little bit, though, about some of the threat actors that really love a recruiting theme in terms of Iran-based threat actors, because there's not just one. So first up, we have a group that PwC calls Yellow Garuda. They're probably more commonly known as Charming Kitten in open sources. This is a really active group. We're not going to be talking about them today. But some of the recruiting type things they do is they specifically target journalists and other very specific people of interest with job opportunities, whether it be conferences or specific jobs themselves. Then we've got a group that we call Yellow Lightark. They're more commonly known as Tortoiseshell in open sources. And this group has set up fake recruiting companies equipped with personas on social media platforms, specifically targeting US veterans. So several years ago, they created a fake recruiting company that was specifically geared towards hiring veterans. Then we've got a group that we call Yellow Marrow, and this group has been active for many, many years. They're more commonly known as APT 34, Oil Rig, or Cobalt Gypsy in open sources. Like Yellow Lightark, they do run a lot of personas, or have run a lot of personas on various social media platforms, again, purporting to be recruiters from valid and fake companies. But we're not talking about any of these folks today. We're talking about a group that we call Yellowdev 13. And again, for people who are in the room and do Iran-based research, I do realize this is not an exhaustive list. This is just highlights. Okay, so who is Yellowdev 13? There has been a little bit of open source reporting on them. So there was a report that came out from Meta. I believe it was their Q1 or maybe Q2 report, came out in April of this year that talked a little bit about some takedown activity that they did for some of the personas that this group was running. There was also some work done by Microsoft to take down some brand infringement type work that this group was doing, and that was reported under the nomenclature Boreum. This group does overlap with some reporting under Imperial Kitten for those who subscribe to that flavor of threat intel, but they've been active for a fair amount of time in the grand scheme of things. So they've been around since about 2019. We believe that they're espionage focused. We haven't seen any indications that they've been performing other types of operations. And again, in terms of their targeting, it's pretty run-of-the-mill for Iran-based operators. So we're seeing, in terms of targeted regions, the US, UK, Canada, obviously places in the Middle East like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and then some targeting in Russia and India as well. And then the sectors that they were targeting, again, with their particular operations, pretty run-of-the-mill in terms of Iran-based espionage operations. Energy, technology, transportation, semiconductor, and then we also saw some logistics and maritime targeting as well. But what we're really here to talk about with them today is a lot of the fake stuff that they use. So this group really likes fake stuff, and that is a technical term, and you can quote me on that if you want. So they have done a litany of fake things. We are going to focus on the HR-themed aspect of that, but I did want to cover just the broader operations in terms of all the fake stuff that they've created. So they've created a lot of spoofed companies, again, geared towards those targeted verticals and regions that we were talking about. They've also spoofed legitimate recruiting companies, both broad ones and very specific ones in terms of the types of folks that they were targeting. But more interestingly, they have set up a couple of fake recruiting companies. One's called Applied Talents, and that was set up first. And the other is called, or was called, Careers Finders. And along the lines of these organizations, they also have set up some personas associated with them. Now, in the past, with some of the groups that we mentioned that have done persona-based social engineering, we've seen those groups use pictures of real people. In the case of Yellowdev 13, we've actually think that they're using AI-generated images, and we'll look at some of those later. But in terms of hunting for this activity on your network, as of earlier this week, the Applied Talents site was still active. So if you are concerned about these threat actors potentially being targeting your employees or being on your network, I would take a retrospective look in my network for these two domains that we've put on the slides. And again, this will be available after the talk. Okay, so you might be wondering why Yellowdev 13 doesn't have a beautiful mythical creature name as opposed to some of the other groups that we talked about, and that's because we didn't have a full intrusion chain for this particular group. So they're not a group that we're comfortable lumping into some of our existing groups or breaking out into its own group. So a little bit of backstory there. But we do have a fairly good idea of how they're using Applied Talents in terms of their operations. So this, like a lot of these, starts on social media, we think. So we're not sure exactly how they are delivering the links to their particular victims, but it could be a myriad of ways. We know they run profiles on LinkedIn, and they also run them on some other social media platforms. But what we did see was that links were delivered to people that would encourage them to download a zip file from the Applied Talents website. And if the victim opens that, it launches something called onlineinterview.exe. And we were like, cool, here's the malware. And when we started doing analysis of the malware itself, it actually wasn't malware. It was just an exe. And something funny happened with this, and we will look at it momentarily. but the onlineinterview.exe actually prompts the user for credentials, and this isn't a credential stealing operation. We actually think that Yellowdev 13 supplies the credentials to the victim, and there's a couple reasons for that. One, it evades detection for sandboxing this particular exe, and two, it keeps people like Sveva and I the ability to fully understand the full intrusion chain. So we think what happens is Yellowdev 13 authenticates the victim, and then there is some payload that's dropped that will essentially take things off the targeted network. And again, if you're concerned about this, check for apply talents on your network. But let's take a look at onlineinterview.exe because it's sort of fun. So this is what the interface looks like. I didn't squeeze or pull the image at all. This is it. I love that people enjoyed it as much as I did. I was so pumped when I saw this. There is hashes available on public sandboxes if you want to take a look at it yourself. For me, I looked at this and like, what's the first thing everyone wants to click, right? I know what it is. Like, I want to talk to somebody live. So we looked at that. Nothing fun happened, unfortunately, but I do want you to know, like, it wasn't just like there. You could actually click on and it pops up a chat panel. We didn't get anywhere with this. So up next, we kind of went through the whole interview guide, or Goody, if we enjoy the misspelling there. And again, we were trying to navigate through to kind of figure out what the end goal was with onlineinterview.exe. The feedback from our team as we were looking at this is, wow, this is homemade. So here's the prompt that we got with the credentials, and this is about as far as we got. We did try to click around some more, and we got a couple error messages like this one. So one of the things I failed to mention, thank you, that was our reaction too. One of the things that I failed to mention is Apply Talents and Careers Finders both purported to be UK-based recruiting companies. So one would assume that either there would be some QA process with this online interview tool, perhaps by somebody who would be probably a native English speaker. So have not passed your technical test, please pass it first. There's a lot going on there. We're not going to go there. But yeah, we really enjoyed looking at this. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and look at some of the illustrious team behind this awesome tool. And I pulled a quote from the Careers Finders website that I'm just going to read because, again, we love this. This is a direct quote. "Will help you find a job that fulfill your desires." UK-based company, so we would, yeah. I enjoyed it too, a lot. A little too much, I put it on the slides, right? Okay, so I mentioned that this Yellowdev 13 runs a handful of personas associated with their operations. And what we have seen with this group is most of the images were likely AI generated. In the case of Abigail Walker, we think it was a real woman whose images were being used, hence being blanked out, because they changed the profile image over time. Abigail Walker is not a real person, though. And one of the things I absolutely love about these personas, particularly the ones on LinkedIn, is if you actually look at them, they make no sense whatsoever. So Abigail Walker is a human resources information systems consultant, according to her job title. But if you look at her bio, she's a recruiter or a staffing expert. That doesn't make any sense. The other thing that we always look at when we're looking at these profiles is how many connections they have. That gives us an indication of how successful they might have been with some of their social engineering operations. So in this case, Abigail, 265 connections, still a little scary. All right, then we've got Brian Clare. And I'm not going to point out the specifics of these AI-generated images where we think that they are fake, but I will give you guys some clues when you start looking at these. Backgrounds, ears, eyes, glasses, jewelry, hair. Like some of those are major tells with the AI-generated images. So Brian's great. Brian's profile is great too. This is another just profile that makes absolutely no sense. So LinkedIn's a professional network. We would assume that people are on there for professional reasons. We think Brian was probably purporting to be a recruiter, even though his job title suggests otherwise. And if you want to get in touch with Brian, here's this really sketchy Gmail account that you can email. Doesn't make any sense. He had a lot of connections, though, which is a little concerning. And his profile was active for a fair amount of time. It is no longer. Okay, so let's meet the team as they purport to be. on the actual websites themselves. So this is literally a screen grab from the Apply Talents website and the Careers Finders website. Nothing's modified here, grainy image and all. And again, both of these, Apply Talents was created first, and Careers Finder was created shortly thereafter, back in 2019. So at first, we've got the Apply Talents team: Edward Miles, Scarlett Grant, James Sharp, and don't worry, I'm going to show the pictures a little bit more closely so we can enjoy what these actually look like. And then we've got Edward Miles, Scarlett Grant, and James Sharp of Careers Finder. Same names, same order, completely different people. The other thing that was similar on these websites is they had the same UK-based phone number. All right, so let's have a little fun and drill in specifically to some of these images, just so everyone can get a look. Remember what I told you about looking at AI-generated people. So we've got Edward Miles of Apply Talents, and then Edward Miles of Careers Finder. Now, Apply Talents was created first. I think they clearly used a different AI-generated, and I would say better, imaging software or whatever they decided to use for their personas for Careers Finder. Okay. Some of these are pretty good. Some of these are pretty bad. Here's Scarlett Grant of Apply Talents and Careers Finder. Remember what I told you? Backgrounds, sometimes the eyes, the ears. Hopefully people can see a couple of funny things with this one. All right, we've got James Sharp of Apply Talents and Careers Finder. I actually think James of Careers Finder is pretty good. You're going to see a watermark on the image. That's from us pulling the image from a VM, not from the image itself. I hope everyone has fun looking at these. Okay, so these are the fake people of the two recruiting companies. I have a couple more that were associated with Yellowdev 13 operations, but not necessarily the recruiting companies, but I think they're interesting examples if you want to look at some more AI-generated humans. Hopefully people notice some things that are like, yeah, that doesn't pass the sniff test. Great. Okay, so let's round things out in keeping with the HR theme and recruitment theme of this talk. When we think about what we talked about today from a network defender or blue team, red team perspective, we can really kind of, again, continue this theme of HR recruitment. When we look at the TTPs of the threat actors, particularly the ones we talked about today, this is really their CV, their skill set, their resume. Like, these are all the things we can do and how good we are at it. And then we've got the targeting itself. So that gives us the motivations, gives us an idea of like what they're out to do. We have threat actors that are espionage focused and threat actors that are financially focused that we talked about today. And then finally, in the case of these three groups that we talked about, they literally build networks of people to help perform their operations, which is really, really interesting. But finally, let's take these takeaways up just a notch. Threat actors are capitalizing on the Great Resignation. So Yellowdev 13 is a great example. Yes, they were active since 2019, but what we saw over the course of the last 3 years is they updated their site, particularly Apply Talents, to kind of roll with the climate in terms of hiring. So right now, the site has a lot of COVID-19 themed pages. It's also got a whole page, or had a whole page on remote work. So threat actors are paying attention to what's happening and pivoting accordingly. 2, social engineering still works. I know we're super tired of talking about it, but we're seeing it evolve. So again, like with the personas that we're seeing used and the way that threat actors are approaching our employees, they're reaching out on WhatsApp, on LinkedIn, on other mediums. They're using AI-generated images to make their personas look more legitimate. we're going to continue to see an evolution, not just in how they approach, but how they deliver. So Microsoft did disable internet macros on things going forward. That's awesome. We're going to see threat actors shift in terms of how they deliver malware, though, in these phishing exercises. And then finally, how do we defend against this sort of stuff when we don't own our employees' social media profiles? So as we saw, these people or the threat actors are reaching out to people on things that we just don't control. And I kind of challenge the people in this room to think about your organizational security culture. Are your employees empowered, or do you have a culture where they can come to you and say, hey, I think I've been phished by a fake recruiter? I mean, I personally don't know many employees who'd be comfortable going and saying, hey, I'm looking for another job, and I think I got socially engineered. All right, so with that, I think we have about 3 minutes for talks, or we can kind of move to the speaker breakaway room. We do have a GitHub page that we have published this morning. Did we do it right before the talk? We did it today.
Yes.
That has all of the indicators that we talked about today. And again, the slides will be available tomorrow morning.
Yeah, the GitHub link will also be in the reference slides when they're published tomorrow, so no fret on that.